There's a reality that has been often avoided from the pulpit, and that is that life, though full of wonder and full of beauty, is full of difficulty. It's not easy. None of us are spared from hardship, and yes, it looks different from case to case, but the truth of the matter is Jesus was including you and me and everyone on earth when he said, "In this world you will have trouble." And as we look at today's text, we see Paul in the midst of trouble. When Paul wrote the book of Philippians, he was in prison. He was facing outright, obvious persecution day after day. He was in jail. He was in a cell for preaching his faith. And not only that, but the people he was writing to were also facing persecution every day. Certainly, the persecution and hardship we face is not the same as what Paul and the early church faced, but it's hardship all the same. We cannot discount it. We can't diminish the fact that we too face opposition in our pursuit of discipleship to Jesus. And I know what you're thinking. You didn't come here to hear about life being hard. You're living it. You know. Maybe you're struggling right now. I could list off 1,000 examples of all the things that life throws at us. Maybe you're struggling financially. You're trying with all your might to make ends meet at a job that you're just not even happy in, a job that doesn't satisfy you. Or maybe someone you love or even yourself are sick, and there's nothing you or the doctors can do to help them. Maybe you feel lost. Your dreams seem to have shattered at your feet, and you don't even know where to go from here. I'm with you, but I'm also here to speak into that trouble and even into the despair you may feel. We must not neglect what Jesus said in the very next breath in John 16:33, that he said, yes, in this life, in this world, you will face trouble, but take heart, I have overcome the world. We do not face hardship and trouble without hope. As we come to today's text in Philippians 4, I believe we see Paul putting some skin on this truth that Jesus spoke to us. Let's go ahead and just read that whole passage together right now. Therefore, my brothers and sisters, you whom I love and long for, my joy and crown, stand firm in the Lord in this way, dear friends. I plead with Yoda and I plead with Syntyche to be of the same mind in the Lord. Yes, and I ask you, my true companion, help these women, since they have contended at my side in the cause of the gospel, along with Clement and the rest of my co-workers whose names are in the book of life. Rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice. Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. Whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put it into practice, and the God of peace will be with you. In this text, Paul lists out 5 ways that we can hold fast, 5 ways that we can take heart and remain strong in the Lord in the face of trouble and hardship. Let's take some time and break this text down and look at each one of these 5 points. Let's go back to verses 2 and 3 together. I plead with Yoda, and I plead with Syntyche to be of the same mind in the Lord. Yes, and I ask you, my true companion, help these women, since they have contended at my side in the cause of the gospel, along with Clement and the rest of my co-workers, whose names are in the book of life. Now, what does this have to do with standing firm in the midst of trouble? It kind of seems like a random little interjection of community issues, and that's just it. Paul is addressing the disunity of the Philippian church. He pleads with these two women to agree and to end their quarrel. And though this is obviously addressing a specific issue in the lives of the people of Philippi, I believe that there's a very important lesson for us in it. Here, we see Paul fighting for the unity of church. We see Paul placing high value on community. And what does this mean for us? It means we cannot do this alone. We need each other. History holds quite a bit of scandal when it comes to the church. Everywhere we look, we can find examples of disunity and failure, even in the life of the church. Without doubt, community can be messy. And this, unfortunately, has and can cause some to fall away from the faith and from the church altogether. But here we see Paul entreating the church of Philippi to look past their disagreements for the sake of family and for the sake of themselves. God intended for his people to live together in unity. And just as Paul fights for unity in the Philippian church, we should too fight for unity in our own churches and our own communities. We were made to labor side by side, as Paul says, and to hold each other up along the way. So the first directive that we see in this passage is this: surround yourself with community who will point you to Jesus when times get hard. Our next directive is found in verse 4, where we read a very well-known statement: rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice. I don't know about you, but when I hear this, my gut reaction is often this mix of hopeful but hesitant. The deepest part of me wants to live from the place of joy in my everyday life. I know that living out of joy is the best way to live, but I also know the reality of life. And as hard as I try, there are moments that it seems impossible to rejoice. I believe this hesitancy comes from the belief that it's our duty to muster up joy in every situation. And living from this belief causes us to deny the fact that our present circumstances are hard. It causes us to neglect the emotions that were given to us by God. And I think it's important that we take the time to reframe and redefine joy and what it means for our lives. I once read that joy derives from a conviction that despite present circumstances, God is in control and will save those who belong to Christ. Under this definition of joy, we're not neglecting hardship. Joy actually looks in the face of our present situation. It looks in the face of hardship and opposition and persecution, and it says that the cards I have been dealt are not fair. What is happening to me is not okay. But the steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is his faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, therefore I will hope in him. Joy looks in the face of hardship and it declares the faithfulness of God. Paul is not telling us to ignore the fact that we're facing hardship. He's telling us to face the reality of hardship in life and rejoice in the overarching reality of his faithfulness. So our second directive is to rejoice in the reality of God's faithfulness. Next we read, let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. And in order to fully understand what Paul is asking of us, we have to look at the origin of the word gentleness. In its original Greek, this word is often used of an attitude of kindness. And it's not just a simple, polite kindness, but it's actually kindness where the normal, expected response is retaliation. This is a gentleness that is shown to those directly opposing us. those who the world would say fight back. Um, the old adage, hurt people, is true, unfortunately. We are surrounded by broken and hurting people, and this means that throughout our lives we will be sinned against. It's unavoidable. And whether it's intentional or not, people are going to hurt us. Turn over with me for a moment to Matthew 5:38-41. Here we find Jesus' teaching on our response to those who sin against us. You have heard that it was said, eye for eye and tooth for tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat as well. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. Now, this without a doubt could be its own teaching. But in short, what Jesus is teaching us is that our response to those who sin against us should not be retaliation. In fact, he goes on later in that same passage to tell us to love our enemies and to pray for those who persecute us. And he doesn't just command this, Jesus actually lives it. He was betrayed by those close to him, rejected by those he came to save. And yet he still died for those people. He died for us while we were still enemies. Jesus is our example. And Paul is following in his footsteps. He is a true disciple. He is modeling the life of, like his Savior's, a life of non-retaliation and of enemy love. And he's instructing us to do the same. Paul's statement, the Lord is at hand, ensures us that we can trust that no matter what, God is with us and will work for our good in the end. So, our third directive here is to answer opposition with non-retaliation and enemy love. Let's look at the next verse. Next we read, do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. Now, when we face hardship, it can be so easy to simply rely on our own wisdom and strength to find resolution to whatever that problem may be. That is the human way to handle problems. But here, Paul is showing us a different way. He is actually instructing us to lay our anxieties at the feet of Jesus in thankful prayer. This is an act of trust and dependence in which we say, I have this problem, but I know that your ways are higher than mine. Your thoughts are better than mine. You know all of the answers, and so I'm going to trust you and give you this issue. Again, Paul was putting more flesh on Jesus' teaching. In the book of Matthew, we see that Jesus asks for our burdens and promises that his yoke is easy and his burden is light. So how do we give him our burdens? We lay them at his feet in prayer, and we trust that he is going to take care of us. We trust that he will never let us down. And in thankful prayer, we lay our worries and fears at Jesus' feet and declare that the same power that raised him from the dead lives within us. Take heart, he has overcome the world. We stand in the assurance of his power and his faithfulness. And this makes directive number 5 this. We lay our anxieties at the feet of Jesus in thankful, trusting prayer. Now we're going to skip verse 7 for now, but don't worry, we'll be back. Let's have a look at verse 8 first. It says, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. One commentator suggested that this was actually Paul's way of pushing the Philippians to look at the good parts of their surrounding culture. Where there was persecution and injustice, they could choose to fix their eyes on what was good and lovely and remember that despite all of the brokenness, those persecuting them were still made in the image of God. There is still hope for them. And whether this was Paul's intention or not, I think we can pull a significant lesson from that point. When it seems that there is no hope in a given situation, we must fix our eyes on the evidence of the kingdom of light that is all around us. All that is true, honorable, just, and lovely in the world, it's there. We just have to look for it sometimes. And this keeps our eyes on the light, and it helps us to remember that He has not forsaken us and He never will. So our final directive, we have to trust that His light will always outshine the darkness. Now, some of you may be thinking, this all sounds great, Hannah, but how can these spiritual acts actually change my situation? I will admit that the directives we find outlined in Paul's teaching, they don't give us any direct advice or wisdom for how to handle specific aspects of our individual hardship. But I believe that they do form an integral and all-encompassing foundation for standing firm in the face of opposition and hardship. The final two paragraphs end with the same promise. So let's look back at them and see if you can point that out. Rejoice in the Lord always. I will say it again, rejoice. Let your gentleness be evident to all. The Lord is near. Do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation, by prayer and petition, with thanksgiving, present your requests to God. And the peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about such things. Whatever you have learned or received or heard from me or seen in me, put it into practice, and the God of peace will be with you. Do you see it? What does Paul promise? Peace. Paul says that if we follow his instruction, if we take all that we have learned and we put it into practice, the peace of God, a peace that transcends all understanding, will guard our hearts and our minds in Christ Jesus. This is it. We are not promised a speedy resolution or the absence of trouble, but we are promised that the God of overwhelming peace will be with us every single step of the way if we let Him. None of these directives that we have discussed are about doing the right thing. They're not a to-do list that we check off to guarantee an easy life. What they are is a way of posturing ourselves to receive peace that surpasses understanding. And that peace is strong enough to carry us through any storm.